6 books make up the shortlist for this year's FT McKinsey & Company Business Book of the Year Award. The World for Sale: Money, Power and the Traders Who Barter the Earth's Resources by Javier Blas and Jack Farchi. The modern world is built on commodities, from the oil that fuels our cars to the metals that power our smartphones. We rarely stop to consider where they come from, but we should. In The World for Sale, Javier Blas and Jack Farchi lift the lid on the workings of the billionaire commodity traders who buy, hoard and sell the Earth's resources. It's the story of how a handful of cavalier businessmen became indispensable cogs in global markets by enabling an enormous expansion in international trade and connecting resource-rich countries, no matter how corrupt or war-torn, with the world's financial centers. At the center of The World for Sale is the story of how a small number of traders acquired untold political power, right under the noses of Western regulators and politicians. It's an eye-opening tour through the wildest frontiers of the global economy, as well as a revelatory guide to how capitalism really works.
In The World for Sale, reporters Javier Blas and Jack Farchi have come up with a very accessible book on one of the most opaque aspects of how we all live. This is about the people and the firms that buy and sell commodities: oil, metals, grains, cotton. It's a very high-stakes, secretive, and wild world in which hundreds of millions can be won or lost on business bets by individuals who are really in the shadows, in a very secretive but extremely influential corner of business.
And we are put in a rather strange situation as readers. Do we treat them as big personalities, huge egos, willing to cross way too many lines, setting aside all sorts of moral and ethical considerations? Or do we admire their agility, helping markets to respond to challenges and solving them? Or maybe it's both. All I know is that it's not easy to produce a book like this. It's extremely well-researched, well-sourced, and incredibly well written. The result is an entertaining and insightful book that will appeal to an audience that goes well beyond those that participate in these markets.
I mean, there's so much I liked about this book, but I think where they score also is on the question of our moral economy and whether it's, the food on our table, the gas in our cars, the minerals in our cell phones. All of us around the world, we all want things cheap and we want them now. And we are most often willfully blind into the real price in human rights and democracy and in the lives, especially in other nations. This tour de force reads like a thriller and it inspires like an epic, but ultimately it's a tragedy. This book, I believe, will stand the test of time. It is that compelling.
Empire of Pain: The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe chronicles the history of the Sackler family, one of the richest in the world, whose name adorns the walls of many storied institutions: Harvard, the Met, Oxford, and the Louvre. Famous for their lavish donations in the arts and sciences, the source of much of the family fortune was Purdue Pharma, which, under the ownership of brothers Mortimer and Raymond Sackler and other relatives, was responsible for making and marketing OxyContin, a blockbuster painkiller that was a catalyst for the opioid crisis in America, which killed nearly 500,000 people. Empire of Pain exhaustively documents the jaw-dropping and ferociously compelling reality, the story of a dynasty, a parable of 21st century greed.
Empire of Pain is the secret story of the Sackler dynasty, and it's a page-turner. It's beautifully written, it's deeply researched, and it's a chilling portrait of a family that was celebrated the world over while making a fortune out of selling opioids. It's a story of greed, of corruption, failures of regulation.
It's many stories within a story. Yes, it's a story about corporate greeds and incentives gone amok. But it's also a family saga in which we see the playbook for modern marketing get invented with value. And very, very importantly, it's also a story about failed government accountability, oversight, regulation, a story that we see repeated over and over again. We've seen it with guns, with the tobacco industry. Now we're seeing the oil industry get called to account.
Despite it already being a well-publicized story, Empire of Pain is a shocking read for those who might think that they're beyond being shocked. It charts the pioneering of drug marketing by the founder of the family fortune, the creation of Valium as the industry's first blockbuster, compromising of public regulators, and the very callous creation and exploitation of addiction. And worst of all, denial. The drug wasn't the problem was the abusers, one of the family says. All of this against a backdrop of buying respectability through financially starved arts organizations. It's a horrifically fascinating story showing that one should never underestimate how the system can be abused, even in this world aspiring to responsible corporates.
The Conversation: How Talking Honestly About Racism Can Transform Individuals and Organizations, by Robert Livingston. Robert Livingston, a Harvard social psychologist, has made it his life's work to show people how to turn difficult conversations about race into productive instances of real change. The Conversation explores the root causes of racism, ways to foster greater empathy, and offers tangible steps towards racial equality. In the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, issues of racial injustice and discrimination are more critical than ever. Whether it's the makeup of a company's leadership team or the makeup of one's neighborhoods, these racial divides and disparities continue to permeate every facet of society. In The Conversation, Livingston distills decades of research and practice into a solution-oriented roadmap for anyone seeking to dismantle systemic biases in the workplace and begin the work of anti-racism. It is an essential tool for turning well-intentioned diversity statements into measurable, achievable outcomes.
The Conversation is the most authoritative guide to strategies for building diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's written by renowned social psychologist Robert Livingston, and it's a very important guide for anyone running a company and committed to change. What I like about it is that it's a roadmap that confronts you with inconvenient truths, explains bias that you might not even recognize, but it also guides you towards a more hopeful future. I think it's a must-read for CEOs all over the world.
The Conversation is a timely, action-oriented book on an issue that is of importance to all of us. It seeks to provide us with the GPS to navigate to a more racially just and equitable world. It's well-structured, written in an engaging manner which combines the science with specific examples, and has great insights on the dynamics of racism. It facilitates the types of conversation that we should be having, but many find very difficult to do.
What's unusual and compelling about the book is that it brings together sociological research, economic research, along with feelings to try to get progress made on these important issues. One of the key things that differentiates this book from others is that balance between the facts and between feelings. Actually, his rule number one is gather the facts and make room for feelings. That's how we're going to make progress on these important issues, and Livingston's Conversation is going to be crucial in making that happen.
It's a book that will allow for more informed conversations, but not as an end in itself, but rather to enhance, and here I will quote the book, the right head, heart, and stomach to deal with a difficult issue that is of so great importance.
The New Climate War: The Fight to Take Back Our Planet, by Michael E. Mann. Fossil fuel companies have waged a 30-year campaign to blame individuals for climate change in order to deflect blame and responsibility from themselves. The result has been disastrous for our planet. In The New Climate War, renowned scientist Michael E. Mann argues that all is not lost. He draws the battle lines between the people and the polluters, fossil fuel companies, right-wing plutocrats and petrostates, and outlines a plan for forcing our governments and corporations to wake up and make real change. Mann puts forward an attainable approach to carbon pricing, debunks the false narratives and arguments that have worked their way into the climate debate, and tackles climate doomism and despair-mongering. The new climate war aims to inform and enable citizens everywhere to join this battle for our planet, emphasizing the importance of both urgency and agency in the effort to prevent a climate catastrophe.
So Michael Mann is a very persuasive scientist. In The New Climate War, what he really provides readers is a refreshing and very honest lens into why so much of our climate change conversation has really become about gloom, guilt, and doom. And instead, he gives us ways to actually read the book and make a difference at scale. We've all been asked to carry the burden of climate change as individuals, even as so much needs to be done at the institutional, at the corporate, at the government levels to really make a critical difference. And in The New Climate War, Michael arms us with both the knowledge and the context, but really gives us hope and tools in a very practical way to go about solving for our climate crisis.
The New Climate War also talks about how in the United States in particular, we have a propensity to want to believe in individual responsibility, and so how systematic change can get diverted into a call for individuals to change details of our lives, which, while important, will not solve the larger question. And I think that's an important framing for the issue, particularly in the United States.
The New Climate War articulates my deep fear that we're missing the big picture on climate change by giving such disproportionate attention to micro actions, not least by individual consumers. Michael Mann causes deflection, a new, more insidious tactic used to prevent debate and action on broad systemic changes needed to fight climate change, such as widespread carbon pricing. This is the new war he describes as being waged by inactivists, as he calls it, no longer outright climate deniers who lack credibility. I don't know if, as he implies, it is a deliberate conspiracy by inactivists, or the usual political short-termism, or just the human condition of not being able to see the wood for the trees, or however many trees remain. But in the blizzard of announcements and commentary after COP26, The New Climate War is essential reading to understand if we are focusing on what actions actually count to get to a 1.5 degree world.
This is How They Tell Me the World Ends: The Cyberweapons Arms Race by Nicole Perlroth. This is How They Tell Me the World Ends is the untold story of the cyberweapons market. 0 Day is a bug that allows a hacker to break into your device and move around undetected. It has the power to silently spy on your iPhone, dismantle the safety controls at a chemical plant, alter an election, and shut down the electric grid. For decades, under the cover of classification levels and non-disclosure agreements, the United States government became the world's largest owner of 0 Days. US government agents paid extortionate figures to hackers willing to sell their lock-picking code and their silence. Then the United States lost control of the market. Now those 0 Days are in the hands of hostile nations and mercenaries. New York Times reporter Nicole Perlroth lifts the curtain on a market that has operated in the shadows and reveals the urgent threat faced by us all if the global cyberweapons race isn't brought under control.
This is How They Tell Me the World Ends is a fabulous book reviewing the history of cyber weapons arms race that we're in the middle of right now. What's really special about the book is that it traces the history back to the US itself, and how the US, with its dominant power in cyber capability, technology, and talent, stockpiled all the vulnerabilities in the cyberspace, and how that advanced reach has now been caught up by Russia, China, UAE, Saudi Arabia, that are now entering the marketplace and putting US infrastructure, hospitals, and voting machines at risk.
The authors spent a number of years investigating the world of security vulnerabilities, how they're found, identified, used, and how they've been weaponized. She traces early vulnerabilities, for those of us that remember Stuxnet and the Iranian nuclear power processing, and she describes vulnerabilities that are being exploited today. She's got a fair amount of technical detail. I think she strikes a good balance between what the technical understanding is and translating that into real world experiences. And she's got, the set of problems that are out there, some directions as to what might be done. But the most important thing is she's managed to make her way through this very secretive world and learn enough to be able to describe it to us in ways to bring a new topic like cybersecurity to make it real and vibrant for us.
You will never look at your phone, your computer, or anything with an electric plug the same way again. This book delivers a very troubling conclusion, and it doesn't mince words. We need a fundamental rethink about digital connectivity and security.
The Aristocracy of Talent: How Meritocracy Made the Modern World, by Adrian Wooldridge. The Aristocracy of Talent traces the history of meritocracy, from the politicians and officials who introduced the revolutionary principle of open competition, the psychologists who devised methods for measuring natural mental abilities, and the educationalists who built ladders of educational opportunity. Adrian Wooldridge also looks outside Western culture to show the transformative effects it had, especially once women were brought into the meritocratic system. The Aristocracy of Talent highlights how the meritocratic idea is coming under fire from a range of critics who denounce it as an illusion, a trap, a tyranny, and an instrument of oppression. As a result, meritocracy has become corrupted, and the recent stalling of social mobility is the result of failure to complete the meritocratic revolution. Rather than abandoning meritocracy, Wooldridge argues we should call for its renewal.
The idea of meritocracy is really under attack from both the right and the left. And they're right to be critical, because this idea, this ideology, has created the elite that have created all the issues that we grapple with in the world today, from inequality to climate change. But what the book really contributes is a look at the history of time before meritocracy, when your birth determined your place in the world.
Adrian Wooldridge argues that meritocracy is about revolution. The way that we moved ahead and getting rid of the aristocracy was replacing it with the idea of meritocracy, open competition. And obviously there are a lot of merits to that. But of course, there are potential downsides where the elites can capture the institutions and make it difficult for new people to come in. He's very clear-eyed about that and understands the potential downsides, and that's really where the tension is and the interesting part of the argument.
I read The Aristocracy of Talent first and foremost as a parent with a personal interest in how education affects our kids' futures. But of course, education is one of the biggest tools society has for leveling out inequality. What I found so interesting about Adrian Wooldridge's argument is that it's counterintuitive. He's asking, what if the Western world's efforts to level the playing field by reducing or eliminating standardized testing actually had the opposite effect? What happens when education becomes an arms race in which the affluent give it all they have? Very, very provocative food for thought.